M Night Shyamalan is a director that I have an incredible amount of respect for. While he's not perfect and has made a few questionable decisions in his career,
What? No.
as a filmmaker, he is not only highly passionate but knowledgeable and proficient in the art form of directing. His latest film, Knock at the Cabin, is an excellent example of his style as a director in the most honest sense, highlighting both his strengths and weaknesses. Shyamalan uses a classic style of filmmaking, opting for longer takes and allowing the camera movement to be dictated by emotion and action rather than flashiness and a need to constantly keep a higher pace. In Knock in the Cabin, this style is employed brilliantly, as the entire film, save for flashbacks, takes place in a single location. Where another director might try to keep the audience's interest with multiple cuts and strange camera angles, Shyamalan is smart enough to stay away from this approach and chooses his framing and camera angles based on the emotion of the scene. Let's look at the film's opening scene as an example, introducing the audience to Leonard and Wen, played by Dave Bautista and Kristen Chu, who give incredible performances. As Leonard approaches and first interacts with Wen, they're both framed in mid-shots from about the waist up, and respective to each of their positions. Wen is sitting on the ground so the camera's higher and looking down at her, and Leonard is standing so the camera is beneath and looking up. It's a fairly straightforward way of accentuating the height difference between the two, but it's when Leonard sits down to talk that M. Night Shyamalan shows his brilliant use of framing in the film. The scene then plays out almost exclusively in close-up shots on the actors' faces, allowing for small details in their performances to take center stage, from Leonard's apprehension and genuine sympathy towards Wen to Wen's caution and fear as the two characters study each other. Something Shyamalan makes frequent use of in the film to incredible effect.
You know, if you think about this, the language of cinema and wide shots, mid shots, and then close-ups, they are different ways that the characters are interacting with their environment. I'm in a hostage situation like that, and I'm thinking about escape. I might be talking to you, but I'm thinking about how to get out, and I could do that in a wide. That's conveying that the character is saying, hey, it's going to be all right. I'm fine, but I'm thinking about the windows and the doors, and you see me like struggling. If there's a specific thing that I'm feeling, I tend to do it closer. Like I'm trying to ascertain whether you're crazy. I'm in hyper close up with you. I'm watching your facial expressions. I don't really care about your legs. It starts immediately with the stranger showing up, and so there's a lot of close-ups because they're at a 9.
As the scene continues, the frame switches to Dutch angles, or shots are tilted, which, while a fairly basic technique for creating a sense of unease, is done quite well here, as it begins fairly subtly with just a slight tilt and then grows more and more dramatic as the scene plays out and the dark nature of the visit is revealed. Next, let's look at his approach for lighting. He tends to favor a naturalistic style, giving both a dramatic and authentic look to his scenes, allowing for his prominent use of color in the wardrobe and set pieces to be accentuated. Jaron Blaschke, who is the director of photography exclusively for the interior scenes, lit the scenes purely from the exterior of the cabin set, meaning that he didn't stage additional fill lights inside. He only used flags and silks to control the amount of light. In one of the most beautifully shot scenes, Shyamalan and Blaschke show their mastery of light values and color, allowing for the key light coming from just outside the window, meant to be the setting sun, to play only on Sabrina, the healer on a holy mission, leaving Eric, good name by the way, to sit in the darker shaded area, and keeping with his character as he wrestles with the dark nature of their situation and the concepts of faith. Speaking of faith, when it comes to the stories Shyamalan chooses to tell, and Knock at the Cabin is no exception, he tends to favor ones that center on tests of faith, of families, and of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. Whether it's a psychiatrist helping a little boy who sees ghosts, a former priest finding his faith again with his home invaded by aliens, a quiet family man who miraculously survived the unsurvivable, or a small family faced with an impossible choice brought on by people who believe they will save mankind from the apocalypse. This focus lends him to tend not to show graphic violence or horror, but typically builds tension with what the audience does not see, choosing to stay with the characters on their journey rather than to delve into the gory nature of horror. While there have been a few exceptions in his career, he generally takes this approach, which is similar to that of the great Alfred Hitchcock, focusing on the threat of violence rather than on the violence itself, and keeps moments of horror brief and to a minimum.
I don't have a proclivity to do kind of torture porn. It's just, in fact, I'm very sensitive about that when I'm a viewer. You unfairly used my being a human being against me. You didn't provoke my imagination. You are forcing me to feel something in a way that's, I find distasteful. I prefer to find that balance where your mind is filling it in. It can be even worse in terms of its impact on you in the right way.
However, for as well as he sets up the story in Knock at the Cabin, it's the resolution of the story that shows his one weak point. As a director, M Night Shyamalan has become synonymous with twist endings.
What a twist!
Though perhaps a better word than twist would be revelation, as if you follow along carefully, the reveals at the end of his stories generally fall in line naturally with what you've seen, making you want to go back and re-watch for the small hints and clues that have been laid out. In his more recent projects, he's strayed from including these and begun telling more straightforward stories that exist exactly as they seem on the surface. However, with Knock at the Cabin, the premise he lays out almost necessitates the use of one of his famous twist endings. Knock at the Cabin's basic premise is this. A family's cabin is invaded by 4 people who claim to be on a mission to stop the apocalypse, and they tell the family that one of them must sacrifice the other in order to avert the end of the world. Each of them is meant to represent one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which the film itself states, and signifies each of them by the color of their shirt. While heavily deviated from the biblical roots of the 4 horsemen, which bring about plagues of famine, war, and death instead of trying to avert them, this is an incredible opening premise, taking the viewer and putting the scenario in front of them, allowing for the question of what would you do in this scenario? It's a very open-ended premise, and throughout the film, several hints are given that could support one side or the other. Newscasts seem to align with what the 4 intruders are claiming, and death and disease begin to rise as they fail to make a sacrifice. However, during the news report, the footage that is shown is clearly found footage of a tsunami which engulfs everyone, including the person holding the camcorder. Could this indicate that the entire situation is fake? Are the intruders who they say they are, or are they simply malevolent people bent on terror? The film ends up taking a hard stance on this mystery, giving a very definitive and overly spelled out ending, which unfortunately takes away from that engaging initial premise, and would have had a more satisfying ending had it not picked a side. Overall, Knock at the Cabin, while not perfect in every aspect, is an engaging and well-crafted film, giving a great example of M Night Shyamalan's work.
Your family must choose to willingly sacrifice in order to prevent the apocalypse.